They sold my late mother's jewelry. The pawn shop owner was my best friend. My daughter-in-law was stuffing my mother's diamond necklace into her purse when I walked into what used to be my bedroom. The movers she'd hired already carrying out my mahogany dresser, the one my late husband carved for our 25th anniversary. "Oh, Mom, you're supposed to be at your doctor's appointment," she said, not even trying to hide the jewelry box she was emptying, while my son supervised the men hauling away everything I owned, telling them to be careful with the valuable stuff. It's worth more than she ever knew. They'd already sold the house I'd lived in for 43 years, transferred my bank accounts using the power of attorney I'd signed when I was drugged up after surgery, and now they were taking the last pieces of my life. But what they didn't know was that I'd been recording everything for 6 months, and the confused old lady act I'd been playing was about to land them both in federal prison. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me back up and tell you how I became invisible in my own life. My name is Margaret Chen, and until 8 months ago, I thought I'd raised good children. I was 71, recently widowed after losing my husband Robert to cancer, and sitting on an estate worth $3.7 million. Not because we were rich, but because we'd bought our house in Millbrae, California in 1979 for $67,000, and the tech boom had turned our neighborhood into gold. We'd lived carefully, saved religiously, and I had Robert's life insurance, his pension, and my own retirement from 38 years teaching high school chemistry. My son David was a real estate developer, always talking about maximizing assets and portfolio optimization. His wife Jessica was a yoga instructor who drove a Tesla and posted constantly about manifesting abundance. They lived in a house that cost more than Robert and I had earned in 20 years combined, and I'd later learned they were drowning in debt. $847,000 mortgage, $230,000 in credit cards, 2 car loans, and a failed flip property bleeding them dry. My daughter Linda lived in Portland with her husband Mark, running what she called an artisanal pottery studio, but what was really just an expensive hobby funded by constant loans from whoever would give them money. They had 2 kids in private school they couldn't afford, and a house in foreclosure they'd hidden from everyone. Here's the thing about being a widow in your 70s. Everyone starts treating you like you're already half dead. The transformation was instant. The same children who'd called me for advice about everything from marriage problems to investment strategies suddenly started speaking to me in slow, loud voices, explaining simple things like I'd lost my mind along with my husband. It started small. 3 weeks after Robert's funeral, David suggested I give him power of attorney. "Just in case something happens, Mom. It's what Dad would have wanted." He showed up with papers and his lawyer friend, caught me when I was exhausted from grief, and Xanax the doctor had prescribed for anxiety. I signed. That signature would cost me everything. By April, they were having family meetings about my situation. Linda flew down from Portland, and they sat me down in my own living room like it was an intervention. "Mom, this house is too big for you," Jessica said, rubbing my hand like I was a child. "All these stairs, and you're here alone. We're worried." "I've lived here for 43 years, I said. "I can manage stairs." "But Mom, you forgot to pay the water bill last month," David said. I hadn't forgotten. I'd been disputing an incorrect charge, but that didn't fit their narrative. They'd already decided my story, and nothing I said mattered anymore. They started showing up unannounced, going through my things, helping by throwing away what they called clutter, but what was really my life's accumulation of memories. Robert's fishing gear disappeared one day. My mother's china was suddenly too much for you to maintain. But the Tuesday morning in May, when everything changed, I wasn't supposed to be home. I'd had a colonoscopy scheduled for months, but it had been canceled last minute due to the doctor's emergency. I came home to find a locksmith changing my locks and Jessica directing movers like she was conducting an orchestra of theft. "What are you doing?" I stood in my own doorway, shaking. David appeared behind me. "Mom, we talked about this. You're moving to Golden Sunset Manor today. It's all arranged." "I never agreed to that." "You did, Mom. Last week. You don't remember." He pulled out papers. "You signed the admission forms." The signature was mine, But I hadn't signed those papers. I'd signed what I thought were insurance forms, David holding his hand over most of the page, telling me to, "Just sign here, Mom. It's routine." The Golden Sunset Manor, I'd looked it up later, was a memory care facility where they'd already paid a deposit using my money. That's when I learned about the house. They'd sold it, used the power of attorney to list it, accept an offer, and set a closing date, all without telling me. The buyers were David's business partners, and the sale price was $2.1 million, $400,000 below market value. I found out later David got a $200,000 kickback under the table. "You can't do this," I said, but my voice sounded weak even to me. "It's for your own good," Linda said, appearing with boxes of my clothes already packed. "The doctor says you have dementia." "What doctor?" "Dr. Morrison. You've been seeing him for months." I'd never heard the name. Later I learned Dr. Morrison was another friend of David's, a psychiatrist who'd written a diagnosis without ever meeting me, for a fee of $15,000. They moved me out that day, not to Golden Sunset Manor, that was too expensive to actually follow through with, but to a roach-infested studio apartment in East San Jose, paying month-to-month rent while they liquidated everything I owned. They told everyone I was in the nice facility, collecting sympathy for having such a difficult situation with their declining mother. The apartment was a nightmare. One window painted shut, a hot plate instead of a stove, mold climbing the bathroom walls like black ivy. They gave me $500 a month from my own money for expenses and took the rest. My bank accounts, investment portfolios, everything Robert and I had built, they controlled it all. But here's what they didn't know about Margaret Chen. I hadn't taught chemistry for 38 years without learning how to observe, hypothesize, and experiment. And I hadn't been married to a Navy intelligence officer for 49 years without picking up a few tricks about gathering information. The first thing I did was walk to the pawn shop 6 blocks from my apartment. I needed to sell my wedding ring, the only valuable thing they'd let me keep, probably because they thought it was worthless costume jewelry. Robert had the diamond replaced with a much larger one for our 40th anniversary, but he'd kept it in a simple setting that looked cheap if you didn't know what you were looking at. The bell above the door chimed, and I walked into Kim's Pawn and Gold, a narrow shop squeezed between a check-cashing place and a discount mattress store. The man behind the counter looked up from a laptop, and I nearly gasped. It was Henry Kim, my best friend from college who I'd lost touch with after he moved to San Jose decades ago. He was heavier now, gray-haired, but those kind eyes were exactly the same. "Margaret?" His face went through confusion, recognition, then concern. "Margaret Chen? Is that really you?" I burst into tears. Right there in his pawn shop, I sobbed for the first time since they'd thrown me away like garbage. Henry came around the counter, locked the door, flipped the sign to closed, and let me cry until I had nothing left. Then I told him everything. Henry listened without interrupting, his face growing darker with each detail. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "We're going to destroy them. I just need enough money to survive." "No." He held up his hand. "Margaret, I've been in this business for 30 years. You know what I see every day? Elder abuse, kids pawning their parents' belongings while the old folks are still alive. But this, what they're doing to you, this is criminal. And we're going to prove it." Henry, it turned out, hadn't just run a pawn shop all these years. He'd become something of a vigilante for elder justice, working with attorneys, private investigators, and social workers to catch and prosecute abusers. His mild-mannered pawnbroker routine was a cover for a network of people who'd seen too much exploitation and decided to fight back. "First," he said, pulling out a smartphone, "we're going to record everything. This becomes your new best friend." He showed me how to use it, how to secretly record conversations, take photos, document everything. Every interaction with them, every paper they make you sign, every visit. They'll know. No, they won't, because you're going to become exactly what they think you are, a confused old lady who doesn't understand technology. Let them underestimate you. It's your superpower now. The next part of Henry's plan involved his network. There was Sylvia, a former FBI agent turned private investigator who specialized in financial crimes. Marcus, a forensic accountant who could track money like a bloodhound. Elena, an attorney who'd made it her life's mission to prosecute elder abusers. And Dr. Sarah Kim, Henry's daughter, as it turned out, a geriatric psychiatrist who could provide real medical evaluations to counter the fake dementia diagnosis. "But I can't pay," I started. "We work on contingency," Elena said when we met at Henry's shop after hours. "When we win, and we will win, we take a percentage of the recovery. Your kids aren't the first predators we've hunted." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Let David and Jessica continue their crime while we documented everything. Give them enough rope to hang themselves. The more they stole, the more evidence we gathered, the bigger the eventual criminal case. I moved back into my studio apartment with a new sense of purpose. When David visited the next week to get me to sign more papers, this time to cash out Robert's pension, I was ready. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, adding a vague tremor to my voice. "Is it Tuesday already?" "It's Thursday, Mom," he said, exchanging a look with Jessica. I saw her mouth getting worse to him. I let them position the papers, listened to David explain they were insurance documents, and signed exactly where he pointed while the phone in my pocket recorded everything. What they didn't notice was that I'd already photographed every page when they'd stepped out to take a call, documenting their fraud in high definition. 3 days later, they came for my mother's jewelry, the pieces I'd hidden in a safety deposit box they didn't know about, but had stupidly mentioned to Linda on the phone, forgetting that old ladies can figure out how to use speakerphone and recording apps simultaneously. I'd moved the jewelry to Henry's shop for safekeeping, but I'd replaced them with convincing fakes Henry had sourced. Watching Jessica stuff diamonds worth $30 into her purse while believing she was stealing $300,000 worth of heirlooms was almost satisfying. Almost. But David wasn't satisfied with just theft. By July, he'd decided I was living too long. "The doctor says she could go on for years like this," I heard him tell Jessica through the thin apartment walls. They'd rented the unit next door to keep an eye on me, which made surveillance remarkably easy. "We need that life insurance. The market's about to tank, and if we don't cover the margin calls, we lose everything. So what do you suggest?" Jessica's voice was cold. "We can't exactly put a pillow over her face." "No, but confused old ladies have accidents all the time. She's already fallen twice this month." I hadn't fallen once, but apparently they'd been documenting a false medical history, preparing their story. The first accident came the next week. David took me to lunch at a restaurant on the coast, insisting we sit outside on the deck despite the wind. When I got up to use the restroom, he'd moved my chair to the edge of the railing, the back legs barely on the deck. If I'd sat down normally, I'd have toppled backward 40 feet onto the rocks below. But Henry had warned me to check everything. "Paranoia is just pattern recognition," he'd said, so I noticed. "Oh, David," I said loudly, "you moved my chair." Good thing I saw that. I could have fallen. Several diners looked over. David had to smile and move the chair back, his plan foiled by witnesses and my lucky observation. The second attempt was more subtle. My medication started making me dizzy, nauseous, confused for real. Dr. Kim tested them. David had been adding 3 times the prescribed dose of my blood pressure medication to my weekly pill organizer, enough to cause a fatal stroke if I hadn't caught it. We documented everything, keeping the poisoned pills as evidence. By August, they were getting desperate. The house sale had gone through, but the money was already gone, spent on covering their debts, bad investments, and maintaining their lifestyle. They needed the life insurance, and they needed it fast. That's when Linda had her idea. What if she just disappeared? Confused old lady wanders off, never found. We wait 7 years, declare her dead, collect everything. I heard this through the recording device Henry's team had legally placed in my apartment. I'd given written consent, making it admissible in court. They planned to take me on a family boat trip in Monterey Bay, where Linda's husband, Mark, kept a fishing boat. I'd fall overboard, in deep water. My body never recovered. But that's not even the worst part. The worst part was learning why Linda was so eager to help. She had a $2 million life insurance policy on me that I'd never known about, taken out using my forged signature and paid for with my own money. She'd been planning this for years. The boat trip was scheduled for Saturday, August 15th. Elena said we had enough evidence to arrest them, but I wanted more. I wanted them to actually attempt it, to remove any doubt about their intentions. Henry thought I was crazy, but Dr. Kim understood. "You need to see it through," she said, "for your own closure." So I went on the boat trip. It was a beautiful day, clear and calm. David, Jessica, Linda, and Mark were all there, playing the role of loving family. They'd even brought a picnic, complete with champagne to celebrate family. My glass, of course, was drugged. I could tell by the slightly bitter aftertaste I'd learned to recognize. I pretended to sip, letting most of it dribble back into the glass when they weren't looking. We were 5 miles offshore when they made their move. I was asleep in the deck chair, listening to them discuss the plan. "It has to look natural," Mark said. "We all need to be doing something else when she goes over." "I'll be in the cabin getting lunch," Linda said. "I'll be at the wheel," Mark added. "We'll be taking selfies at the front," David said. Perfect alibis. They positioned themselves and David approached me. "Mom, want to see some dolphins?" He helped me to the rail, positioning me against the lowest part. I felt his hands on my back, ready to push. That's when the Coast Guard cutter appeared. Henry hadn't just sent me out there alone. He'd contacted his friend, Captain Rodriguez, who'd been tracking our boat from the moment we left harbor. The moment David touched me, they hit their sirens and loudspeakers. "This is the U.S. Coast Guard. Prepare to be boarded." The look on David's face was worth every moment of hell he'd put me through. He stepped back from me so fast, he nearly fell overboard himself. Linda came running from the cabin. Mark tried to start the engine, and Jessica actually did fall, right onto her face, breaking her nose. The Coast Guard found the drugged champagne, the weighted bag they'd planned to tie to me, and Mark's journal where he'd stupidly written out the entire plan, thinking he was being clever by disguising it as a murder mystery novel plot. But here's the thing about justice. Sometimes it comes in waves. While they were being arrested at sea, Sylvia and Marcus were serving search warrants at their houses. They found everything: the forged documents, the fraudulent medical records, the hidden bank accounts where they'd stashed my money, even a group text where they'd discussed various ways to kill me, complete with crying, laughing emojis. The trial was almost anticlimactic. Elena presented such an overwhelming case that their lawyers recommended plea deals. David got 15 years for attempted murder, elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. Jessica got 12 years as an accomplice. Linda got 18 years. The insurance fraud added extra time. Mark got 10 years and immediately rolled on everyone else for a reduced sentence, revealing that Dr. Morrison had done this to 12 other elderly patients. But the best part? The house sale was reversed due to fraud. All my accounts were restored, with interest. The court awarded me damages from their assets, which meant I now owned both their houses, their cars, everything. I sold it all and donated half to Henry's Elder Justice Network. I kept David and Linda's childhood photos, though, not out of sentiment, but as a reminder that monsters aren't born. They're made by choices, one betrayal at a time. I moved back into my house in Millbrae last month. The new owners were lovely about the reversal, especially since they got their money back plus damages from David's company. They'd actually maintained my garden, said they felt like caretakers waiting for me to come home. Henry and I have dinner every Wednesday now. He helped me install a state-of-the-art security system, and his daughter Sarah stops by weekly to check on me, as a friend, not a doctor. I've started teaching chemistry again, volunteering at the community college, working with students who remind me why I love teaching in the first place. Sometimes I wonder if I should feel guilty about my children sitting in prison. Then I remember David's hands on my back, ready to push me to my death. I remember Jessica pawning my mother's necklace while I watched. I remember Linda calculating my worth in insurance money. And I remember that blood is thicker than water, but apparently not thicker than money. Last week, I got a letter from David in prison. He wanted forgiveness, said he'd found God, that he was sorry for everything. I I wrote back with 2 words. Who's David? Let him think the dementia he invented has become real. It's the smallest of revenges, but sometimes the small ones are the sweetest. At my age, 72 now, I've learned that family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when you're at your lowest, who fights for you when you can't fight for yourself. Henry, Sylvia, Marcus, Elena, Dr. Kim, they're my family now. They saw me as a person worth saving, not a problem to be solved or an asset to be liquidated. The studio apartment in East San Jose was torn down last month. I went to watch the demolition, standing there in my good coat and comfortable shoes, remembering the woman who'd lived there in desperation just a year ago. She'd thought her life was over, that 71 years of living, loving, teaching, and building had meant nothing to the children she'd raised. But she was wrong. They thought I was just a helpless old woman, but I was a chemistry teacher who understood that every reaction has an equal and opposite reaction. They added pressure and heat, thinking I'd dissolve. Instead, I crystallized into something harder, sharper, and absolutely unbreakable. The forensic accountant found more than we'd initially discovered. David had been stealing from me for 3 years before Robert died, taking out loans against the house, siphoning from our investments. The total theft was $1.8 million, not counting the attempted murder for the insurance money. He'd been planning this since Robert's diagnosis, seeing my husband's cancer as an opportunity. I've joined a support group for elder abuse survivors. You'd be amazed how common this is. Children who see their parents not as people who sacrificed everything for them, but as ATMs that are taking too long to dispense cash. We meet every Thursday at the community center, sharing our stories, our pain, and our victories. Some of them never got justice. Their children got away with it, left them destitute and broken. That's why I had to see this through to the end, not just for me, but for everyone who couldn't. Yesterday, I visited Robert's grave for the first time since this all started. I'd been too ashamed before, feeling like I'd failed to protect what we'd built together. But now I could tell him the whole story. And I swear I heard his laugh in the wind when I got to the part about the Coast Guard showing up. Robert always did love perfect timing. His headstone reads, Robert Chen, beloved husband, father, protector. I used to think the father part had become a lie, given what our children became. But now I realize he was a father to the end. He just didn't live to see what that protection would eventually mean, protecting me from them. I'm writing this all down because Dr. Kim says it's therapeutic, but also because I want a record, not of my pain, that's already fading like bruises in reverse, but of my survival, of the network of good people who still exist in this world. Of the fact that 71, or 72, or 80, or 90 is not too old to fight back, to start over, to demand justice. They thought they were throwing away garbage, but garbage can be recycled into something useful. They thought they were pushing a helpless old woman off a boat, but they were actually pushing me into the arms of people who gave a damn. They thought the story was over, but it was just beginning. My phone rings now with calls from reporters wanting to tell this story, from lawyers working other elder abuse cases, from adult children horrified that this could happen and wanting to know the warning signs. I tell them all the same thing. Watch for the moment when you stop being a person to them and become a problem. Watch for when concern becomes control. Watch for when love becomes leverage. And document everything, every conversation, every paper, every pill. Because predators count on shame and silence to hide their crimes. They count on family business staying private. They count on elderly victims being too confused, too tired, or too dead to testify. But I'm none of those things. I'm Margaret Chen, 72 years old, chemistry teacher, Navy wife, survivor, and absolute pain in the ass to anyone who thinks gray hair means gray matter. I've got at least 20 good years left, and I plan to spend them all making sure what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else's mother, father, grandmother, or grandfather. The assistant district attorney told me this was the most thoroughly documented elder abuse case she'd ever prosecuted. "You're like a one-woman FBI," she said. "No," I corrected her. "I'm a chemistry teacher. I just understand that every action has an equal and opposite reaction." They acted. This is the reaction. People ask me if I forgive them. Linda writes from prison, begging for understanding. David's lawyer sends requests for character references for his parole hearings. Jessica's mother, who'd known about everything and done nothing, wants to have coffee and heal our family. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't always virtuous. Sometimes it's just another form of enabling. Would I forgive someone who tried to murder a stranger for money? Number. So why would I forgive them for trying to murder me? They made their choices. Every signature they forged, every pill they poisoned, every lie they told, every push toward that boat railing. Those were choices. Adult choices with adult consequences. I didn't send them to prison. Their own actions did. I teach a different kind of chemistry now, the chemistry of survival, of resistance, of transformation under pressure. My students at the community college don't know the full story, but they know I'm not someone to underestimate. One young woman told me I reminded her of her grandmother. Except scarier. I took it as the highest compliment. Henry wants me to write a book about all this, but I don't know. The story feels both too personal and too universal. Too much mine and too much everyone's. Every elder abuse survivor I meet has their own version. The son who drained the accounts, the daughter who stole the house, the grandchildren who disappeared once the money was gone. We're an invisible epidemic, discarded by the very people we spent our lives building futures for. But we're not dead yet. That's what they miscalculated. They thought we'd go quietly into that good night, too ashamed or afraid to fight. They thought age meant weakness, that wrinkles meant surrender. They thought wrong. I still live in my house in Millbrae. I've upgraded the locks, installed cameras, and got a dog, a German Shepherd named Justice, because I've earned the right to be a little theatrical. The garden Robert and I planted together still blooms every spring. The kitchen where I taught my children to cook still smells like coffee every morning. The bedroom where David's accomplices tried to rob me is now my art studio, where I've taken up painting at 72 because why the hell not? Sometimes at night, I stand at the window and look out at the lights of the valley, thinking about that day on the boat. 5 more seconds and I'd have been in the water. 5 seconds between me and murder. But those Coast Guard sirens, they sounded like angels. Henry later told me he'd been tracking the boat by GPS the entire time, ready to send help the moment anything happened. I wasn't letting you out of my sight, he said. Not for a second. That's love, not blood, not obligation, not manipulation dressed as concern. Just pure, protective, righteous love from a friend who found me at my lowest and refused to let me fall. The money doesn't matter anymore. I have more than I need, and most of it's going to charity when I die. Real charity. Not the David and Linda Retirement Fund. But the freedom matters. The justice matters. The knowledge that I fought back and won. That matters more than all the money they tried to steal. I'm not the same woman who signed that power of attorney in grief and exhaustion. That woman was trusting, naive, believing that maternal love would be reflected and returned. This woman, the one forged in betrayal and tempered in survival, she knows better. She knows that sometimes the people who share your DNA are the most dangerous strangers you'll ever meet. But she also knows that sometimes a pawn shop owner you haven't seen in 40 years will become your avenging angel. That sometimes a network of strangers will fight harder for you than your own children ever did. That sometimes 71 isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of your comeback. They sold my mother's jewelry, but they didn't sell my spirit. They stole my house, but they didn't steal my home. They tried to take my life, but they only gave me a reason to live it louder, prouder, and absolutely unapologetically. I am Margaret Chen. I am 72 years old. I survived attempted murder by my own children, and I'm not done yet, not by a long shot. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.